intelligencesquared.com.
This is the point of the panel when we open up to your questions. So please identify yourself. Wait for a mic to come to you. Please raise your hand to show if you have a question. While we wait for the mics to go out to the questioners, I'll just announce the tally of our pre-debate voting results. Before you heard these very cogent and compelling arguments, before the debate, 72 of you voted in favor of the motion. 89% of you voted against the motion, and fully 100 of you said you didn't know. So that's where the lion's share was. Minds were open at the beginning. We'll see where they end up at the end. Yes, please, right here in the middle.
Yeah, I'm Bob Ward from the Grantham Research Institute at London School of Economics. All the speakers have interpreted this motion as UK's policy on climate change should begin in China. And I was wondering if they considered it actually as London's policy on climate change should begin in Beijing. If you consider London and Beijing's position, particularly given that cities are now home to half the world's population and they're central to the solution, do you think if London and Beijing as rival cities, would you still be arguing the same side of the argument, or would you change your argument?
And actually, no, I'm going to take a few questions because we have so little time now. So in the very back, please. We'll take all those together. Yes.
Okay, Martin Earnshaw from Battle of Ideas. While I give credit to the against camp for not effectively outsourcing our politics to Beijing, I think there is a danger of saying that everything happens so exciting in China that we do effectively look to them to give a lead on everything. I do think they've got it slightly the wrong way round. I mean, on the moral case, I mean, how do you address the idea that this is merely gesture politics? You know, saying that for the UK, the 2% is more than the national average per capita. Is that not a good thing? Because it proves that we in the West are a lot richer than people in China who still live in grinding poverty over 80 to 90% of them. I also think, given the economic decline in the West, I mean, is there not a danger with the sustainability of making a virtue of the West's stagnation, given that China has effectively seen through the West's economic model and seen its bankruptcy? They're now in a position to lecture us about that. Are you not in danger of really presuming that lecture to the Chinese? We have no moral authority whatsoever to do that. Effectively, what I would say, if we get growth in the West, right? I mean, and I'm in favour of economic growth rather than sustainability, as you define it. You know, we would have some kind of authority there.
Thank you very much. And we'll take one more question in this round. Sure, right here in the middle.
Hello, my name is Rob Ellsworth from Sandbank Climate Campaign. You were mentioning about this economic advantage of buying sort of cheap technology from China, cheap imports from China and various things. But there's still a lot of good R&D in Europe. There's still a lot of good technology and really advanced technology that's perhaps far beyond the things that are developing in China at the moment. I'm wondering if we sit back and we wait for a dependency for cheap Chinese imports on solar or renewable or various things, are we losing potentially as a technological advantage in Europe that many companies based in Europe have at the moment?
Excellent. Well, I don't know who wants to go first. Largely, we're talking about questions of responsibility that all three of these revolve around, and the West's responsibility, and whether or not, for instance, making a virtue of the fact that the relative decline of the West and the relative growth of China. Sure, Vicky, sorry.
Well, I will start with the easier ones, if that's all right. Leave the serious ones to others, which is the one to do with R&D, for example. I mean, you're absolutely right. There is a lot going on in Europe, but the interesting thing is the extent to which, and I'm a great believer, we can actually assist the Chinese, who are the biggest market after all, will be the biggest market, are already the biggest market, to move to green technology, basically, in terms of their overall production. I'm not just talking about energy, but also mainstreaming normal production, which I think is going to be the greatest saver of us all, really, if that happens properly. But there is a huge issue about IP. And that needs to be resolved, and it has not been resolved yet. And there's also, even where it isn't really so important, there's still the perception that you're going to have it all sort of stolen. But just thinking also about the transfer of, clearly size matters hugely. The question about the big cities, absolutely. I think if we were the same size, although we would actually be in a more advanced state, and therefore wouldn't be using quite so much energy per person, possibly. But we'll be doing it slightly more efficiently. We may be using more, but we'll be doing it slightly more efficiently than them, and there'll be things to learn. But I think the size is important. That's why we're talking about China, because basically they are such a large part of the world economy and will become a much bigger one, and they will be growing for some time. But it's interesting what, again, the transfer of knowledge has done. The UK has been involved in assisting in those green cities which are being developed in China. Using the expertise that we already have and the technology and so on. So we can influence up to a point. And actually the protests that someone mentioned is the environmental issues that actually the Chinese are particularly worried about and the population is worried about. If we can get on the back of that, then I think there would be a win-win.
George?
Yes, I'll address that question from the Battle of Ideas, man. I would say that reducing your carbon emissions is a sign of being a developed economy. What is, if you're obsessed with the idea of how developed we are or how developed we aren't, what's the more developed and sophisticated technology? Unabated steam coal being burnt in a thermal plant or fourth generation nuclear? You don't have to produce loads of carbon emissions to prove your virility in the global economy. And in fact, that very high carbon intensity of production is a sign of an economy which hasn't gone through the necessary transition towards new, clean, green technologies, which are kind of good for everyone. What would you rather be, a worker in a coal mine or a worker in a place without any of those noxious side effects and industrial injuries and all the rest of it? And so, to try to pitch this as a way of creating some sort of primitivist economy, I think is to get it precisely the wrong way around.
Malcolm, would you like to add anything to those questions?
One thing about the cities is a fascinating question, actually. World Health Organization a couple of weeks ago reconfirmed that there's something like 2.5 million early deaths per year because of the quality of city air. Take the Fukushima case. Actually, if you wanted to increase life expectancy, you would evacuate the people of Tokyo into the evacuation zone around Fukushima, not in reverse, because it's a nice rural area without those air quality issues. So I'm not, and London I think has come a long way, although not as far as some cities like Tokyo in terms of cleaning its air up. But beyond that, I think the dynamics of cities, I think London is an extraordinarily successful city and has pioneered a number of policies which are helpful. I think in terms of the issue about celebrating our richness, I have to say, if the atmosphere could take infinite amounts of carbon dioxide and we had infinite resources, I would massively celebrate our how rich we are in the West. What increasingly worries me, though, is that it's not it's not us that's rich. We're taking that richness away from the next generation and squandering it. It's not that we're generating enough to put back into the system. We're using between 2 and 2.5 planets worth of resources at the moment, and that's where we need to address. And I think it's just a dangerous argument, in my view, which comes back to the point that there are the 3 planks to sustainability. It's not just economics or indeed environment. We do need to look at these longer-term social issues as well. Just one final point. I think in the second phase, when people believe the Greens, my belief is that on balance, environmental protest does more environmental damage than good. When the Greens are brought back into their proper place, that's when you start to move forward. But that's the phase we've got to go through. Environmental protests of such are very often not in my backyard and don't actually help the environment.
Simon, would you like to add anything?
Yeah. Just to answer a question that Malcolm didn't ask. Last year, there were actually 39,000 registered protests in China. I think you said a few hundred. 39,000. And what's interesting is that a growing portion of them, there's a lot of data on this, a growing portion of them are responses to environmental and health issues.
I made the same point.
You made
So
exactly the
that's
same point. Sorry, absolutely. Apologies, Vicky.
That's right.
Right.
We're a team.
We're a team.
Together.
Right. Absolutely. Second point on cities, again, just kind of looking at the data. In the next 10 years, 250 million Chinese will be urbanised. 250 million. Just get your heads around that. I don't have a calculator. I think it's like 50,000 a day. Yeah, but somebody else, I'm sure out there, can work it out in their heads. I'm much too old for that. And the grid implications of that, and then I'll kind of come back to why the data, is that every year China adds to its power grid the equivalent of the entire grid of the UK. Yeah, the entire grid of the UK every single year. That's a power station opened every week. Now that means not that, to kind of come back to the HARP comment, that one shouldn't do anything in the UK for equity reasons and for carbon reasons. And they're actually not the same reasons. They're both true. And no one on this stage has said that the UK should just doze and wait for the Chinese to kind of complete the job. But it does mean that we have to be focused on where the big numbers are. And we have to do anything that we can to advance the very complicated process of managing those incredible changes. I mean, you've got, I think, one top lead certified building in this city. It may be more than one now. Somebody will know the data better than me. They're housing 50,000 people a day in China. Try getting lead buildings out of that. That's the quality, environmental quality standard. There are huge process challenges, which is exactly what Malcolm was saying. And actually there, in the soft technology areas, actually more than the hard technology areas, there are ways in which we can actually help. We have a lot of experience that one can bring to bear. So, I still think that all of the questions are pointing towards the same thing. The big numbers, the big changes, the big policy pushes are all coming out of China. That will be to our advantage if we let it happen, allow it to influence the UK, not abandon our R&D, but recognise the potentials of working internationally on R&D, and really go for those big numbers in China.
We'll have to have just, I think, one more question if we can get it up in here. Our question is right at the very front row. And just because of our time constraints, I want to go around the whole room again, but I don't think we'll have the time to, sadly.
Thank you. My name is Stuart Weeder. I'm the treasurer of UKIP, but I'm speaking in a personal capacity. It appears to have been assumed by the whole of the panel that carbon dioxide emissions are a bad thing. And indeed, Malcolm Grimston said, we're all motivated by that belief, or words to that effect. Well, I'm certainly not motivated by that belief. And there are very well-known arguments why carbon dioxide emissions are not a bad thing. And a number of very distinguished scientists hold that view. So does the panel think it's so obvious it is not even worth discussing?
Could you name one of those very distinguished scientists who holds that view?
I haven't got them in my head, but what about the one in, there's the one in, well, you laugh, I just can't be bothered to remember all the names. There's a chap in America who's regarded as the greatest expert in the world on climate change.
Okay, sir. So you come up with a view which is counter to everything we now know, the entire scientific canon of knowledge, and you can't even be bothered to remember the name of a single person who can support that from a scientific perspective.
The names have absolutely nothing to do with it.
Absolutely
what about addressing the arguments rather than the question of who's called what?
Well, where is this argument? Who is producing this argument? Where are the scientific papers demonstrating that argument?
I don't spend a whole time like you do. There are many of these. One of the arguments is that a lot more people are killed by cold than they are by warmth. Another is that even according to the Intercontinental, or whatever it's called, Panel on Climate Change, food production will
Intercontinental Panel on Climate Change.
Don't call me about, because I don't know all the words. The Panel on Climate Change has itself stated that food production, and food production is terribly important, will go up for the first 2 or 3 degrees centigrade, not down. And that's a very important argument.
Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt you guys.
At 2.3 degrees, it says there will be a net loss of the equivalent of 1 billion people's nutrition.
I'm sorry to interrupt you guys, but just at this point, because we are short on time, and because the motion before us, in which this audience is going to vote again now, is London's climate change policy should begin in Beijing, and I want to limit it to that today.
Could I just wrap this up very, very
No,
briefly?
you can do it in your
Come on.
sum.